yesterday's attacks and other things.
Some say that he does have ties to Muslim extremists. I don't know.
Thank you, Morgan.
In early September, the United States imposed sanctions on an Iranian oil shipping network, stepping up its effort to exert pressure on the country's economy. It came days after the Trump administration imposed sanctions against Iran's space program. The sanctions are the latest in a series of actions taken by the United States over the past months, hoping to bring Iran back to the bargaining table to negotiate a new nuclear deal, after Donald Trump withdrew last year from the 2015 deal known as the JCPOA.
ما البته این رو بارها گفتیم الان هم تأکید میکنیم جمهوری اسلامی ایران اهل مذاکره است اهل گفتگوست و اگر آمریکا واقعا مذاکره میخواد قبل از هر کاری باید کل تحریم رو برداره حالا میخواد تو برجام بیاد یا نیاد خودش میدونه کاری به اون نداریم.
Well, I think it's hard to imagine that the Iranians would negotiate with a gun to their head. It is really unrealistic to expect the Iranians who are really suffering from these suffocating sanctions to come to the table because they would think that they would be in a position of weakness.
Whereas the efficacy of economic sanctions is a controversial issue among scholars and policymakers alike, Washington has long been using them as a tool of foreign policy.
It seems that the United States is addicted to sanctions, is addicted to coercion, and it cannot just leave that addiction. Maybe they have to go to a camp.
Imposing sanctions by the U.S. dates back to the time of Thomas Jefferson in the early 19th century, but it became popular in the second half of the 20th century, especially during the Cold War, when the U.S. employed economic sanctions to destabilize unfriendly governments. Even then, sanctions turned out to play a minor role in helping Washington pursue its goals, which mainly was regime change. Cuba is a case in point, as decades of sanctions could not oust Fidel Castro from power. Likewise, economic sanctions on Serbia in the early 1990s did not deter the invasion of Bosnia. The U.S. government's symbolic punishment of chess legend Bobby Fischer for playing a match in Belgrade that violated sanctions provided no relief for the besieged city of Sarajevo. Many scholars and political scientists like Gary Clyde Hufbauer, Jeffrey Scott, and Kimberly Ann Elliott believe that the effects of sanctions are often insignificant. They argue that such measures are often taken for domestic consumption. In the words of Hufbauer, oftentimes the purpose of sanctions is to reassure constituencies in the sender country that their government is doing something about the bad behavior of the target country. Hufbauer believes that the current punitive bills against Russia are just a signal from congressmen and senators to American citizens that they are very serious about Russia, even though anti-Russian measures might be ineffective in reality.
So the point I made is that there's bipartisan legislation that would punish Russia harder than we've done in the past. My takeaway was that everything we've done regarding Russia has not worked. They're still at it. So I have a sanctions bill from hell with Bob Menendez. Rubio and Van Hollen have a bill that would snap back sanctions if they continue to interfere in our election. So my plea to the administration and to my colleagues was, instead of just playing defense, let's go on offense, and Russia will quit when they pay a heavy price, and clearly we have not done enough yet for them to quit.
Whereas there is a strong scientific consensus on the failure of U.S. sanctions, the Trump administration seems to be pursuing economic sanctions as a primary foreign policy tool. Elizabeth Rosenberg of the Center for the New American Security believes that Trump's maximum economic pressure will not deliver the desired result, as the country knows how to bypass sanctions. On the contrary, it will hurt the United States in the long term. According to Rosenberg, for now, the Trump administration can thrill in its sanctions adrenaline high. The next generation of U.S. leaders will be the ones who have to cope with the troubling and enigmatic longer-term outcomes, an even more entrenched and embittered Iran, and a weakened U.S. arsenal of economic tools. Over the past few decades, Iran has learned how to adapt itself to U.S. sanctions. In an interview with Reuters in April, the Iranian foreign minister said his country has a PhD in going around sanctions.
Is there a way of going around the sanction?
I mean, there are always ways of going around the sanctions. We have a PhD in that area. We will do whatever we can in order to continue to sell our oil, in order to continue to provide for the Iranian people. But we are a big country. We have enormous resources, and we can, in fact, survive and even prosper without the need for areas that the U.S. is putting pressure on.
And since the initial shocks after the reimposition of U.S. sanctions, Iran has managed to restore relative stability to its economy. Reports released by international bodies such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund all indicate that Iran is doing well even under strict sanctions.
Iran is not going to sit down and take it easy that the U.S., through its sanctions on other countries as well, will prevent the exportation, importation of oil and other commodities. And therefore, I think this is an unwise step at this point in time.
به هر حال ما خیلی منتظر اروپا نموندیم و نخواهیم موند و با کشورهای دوست به صورت دو جانبه در حال رایزنی هستیم که برخی راهکارهای به اصطلاح تجاری و مالی و بانکی رو با اونها تنظیم کردیم.
But how could Iran be functioning in the face of U.S. sanctions? Whatever the answer, Iran is going to keep it as classified information, and the U.S. is desperately trying to find it out. Recently, the U.S. has put up a reward of up to $15 million for any information that leads to the disruption of the financial mechanisms of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, IRGC. U.S. officials typically attribute the social and economic problems inside the country to their imposed sanctions on the Iranian government.
Sanctions have been very effective, and we will enforce them everywhere. We will enforce them against any company, any country that continues to violate those sanctions. We've already imposed sanctions on one company inside of China. We will continue to do that. It is absolutely imperative that we deny the Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran from having the wealth and resources to build a nuclear program that could threaten anyone in the world.
While economic sanctions inflict great pain, suffering, and physical harm on innocent civilians, and this should raise serious questions among concerned U.S. citizens and within the international community, especially among those who respect international law, the truth is that Iran, regardless of U.S. sanctions, faces many of the global pressures seen elsewhere in the world: urbanization, technological change, income inequality, and so on. Following the Islamic Revolution of Iran in 1979 and the establishment of the Islamic Revolution, the U.S. began to impose sanctions in order to bring the country back to its own orbit as a puppet state, though all in vain.
1 year ago, when Secretary Pompeo presented our new foreign policy to Iran, we made clear that if Iran starts to behave like a normal nation and not like a revolutionary cause, we will lift all of our sanctions, all of them, which have been in place for 40 years.
آمریکایی‌ها مانع بزرگ خودشون رو در این منطقه حساس ایران سرافراز و قدرتمند می‌بینند و لذا هرگاه که ما در پیشرفت‌های داخلی توانستیم حرکت بزرگی را به وجود بیاوریم، اونها سد راه شدند. بی تردید آمریکا به هدف خود نخواهد رسید. ایران سرافرازتر، قدرتمندتر و مردم ایران با استقامت بیشتر و هوشیاری بیشتر در برابر این توطئه‌ها خواهند ایستاد.
By imposing sanctions on Iran, the Trump administration is making the same mistake his predecessors made in relation to Iran. Perhaps it's time to give real diplomacy a chance.